There's a scene in the Twin Peaks pilot that starts with the normal, humdrum, boring rhythms of everyday life. We're in a high school where a schoolgirl sneaks a smoke. A boy is called to the principal's office. Attendance is being taken in a classroom, but then a police officer steps into the class and whispers to the teacher. Suddenly a scream is heard, and outside the window a student can be seen running across the courtyard. The teacher is holding back tears. There's going to be an announcement, and then David Lynch trains his camera on the empty seat in the middle of the class, as two students look at each other across the room and realize all at once that their friend Laura Palmer is dead. Lynch was always good about recording the surface-level details of life, but it's because he couldn't help but pick apart those details in his work. According to Lynch, just always, there was something lurking beneath the surface that was just not right. In many ways, that Twin Peaks moment is the definitive David Lynch scene because of how simply and subtly it establishes the thematic through line of his career. It's also very much not the definitive David Lynch scene because he had so many moments his fans could point to over the span of his 40-plus years of making movies, TV, and art. Ask any coffee-drinking, weather report-watching, card-carrying Lynch fan, and you'll likely get a completely different response on the matter. And this is the heart of what is one of the most difficult things to accept about his passing for us fans. Here was an artist who had such a singular voice, but whose appeal lies in different places for everybody. There are few who can claim to be deserving of a brand new adjective. Everybody has their style, their trademarks, and there is no shortage of films that have been described as Spielbergian or Scorsese-ish, but that misses the point. Those always describe something specific, in lighting, for instance, or subject matter. But then there's Kafkaesque, which can be applied to damn near anything that's just really unpleasant and disorienting. It's a bigger term than the specifics of the work that coined it, and it is to this exclusive club that Lynchian belongs. When you can't quite put your finger on what's amiss, it may as well be Lynchian. It's that unnerving, dreamlike quality that made David Lynch a legend, and his status as such isn't likely to change. Watching Lynch's midnight movie classic Eraserhead was something of a rite of passage for many of us budding film nerds. It was for me, and for a friend of mine as well. Though, little did he know that decades later his son would be undertaking that same rite of passage. But it wasn't just because he was telling his kid that he had to watch Lynch's stuff. No, one day Scott just walked downstairs and found his son sitting there with his girlfriend, binging Twin Peaks all by their own accord. They were in the Wyndham Earle era of season 2 at that point, God bless. There's just always been something about the guy's work that has made it timeless in an odd sort of way, with odd perhaps being the applicable term. How else can one explain how when Twin Peaks: The Return finally happened in 2017, Lynch chose to give the little kid in the show a bedroom that looked like it belonged to a 10-year-old from 1956, with its cowboy trimmings and all? Lynch, perhaps not coincidentally, would have been 10 in 1956. Of course, that kid in The Return also happens to live in a really f***ed up world that only David Lynch could dream up. One where his father is some kind of clone from another dimension, and where there's another evil clone as well who practically punches his fist through a guy's face at one point. The Return came at the height of the let's greenlight every nostalgia play we can think of boom in Hollywood, but Lynch, of course, took that green light and then did whatever he wanted with it. That included leaving the audience as high and dry as any in TV history by refusing to bring back the original Twin Peaks' most important characters in any meaningful way. And why should he have? That would have been the most un-Lynchian thing he could have done. And look at what happened when Lynch did play by the rules of the more conventional Hollywood game. His Dune is one of the most infamous misfires of the past half-century, but it's also a very specifically David Lynch movie, even when it was an Alan Smithy movie. The filmmaker was famously troubled by his experience making Dune, a topic you can explore fully in our friend Max Every's book, A Masterpiece in Disarray. And while the legend of Paul Atreides and the Fremen and the Harkonnens and all the rest of it is there in Lynch's version, it's all peppered with imagery that could have only come from the guy who, a few years earlier, gave us the most nauseating chicken dinner ever put on celluloid. But there's a beauty in Lynch's imagery as well, however weird or funny or disturbing or anachronistic it is. His second feature, The Elephant Man, is as close to Oscar bait as the guy ever came, but it's also an extremely touching and lovely film that happens to be set in an extremely disquieting time and place in history. A world where sideshow freaks actually existed, where their mistreatment was very real, and where a gentle soul like John Merrick didn't have a chance in the world. Until he did, and that is also as Lynchian as it gets. Defining his work, pinning it down to a genre or trope or any of those other boxes we try to use is a fruitless effort. But damn it, if it isn't easy to pick a David Lynch movie out of a lineup. And that was his magic. His film and TV work was dark and funny and dreamlike and surreal and very genuinely strange, but in an organic way, and a million other things that his admirers will be sure to highlight in the coming weeks, like I'm about to do right now. Because one of my favorite things about his films is the way that he was obsessed with a world beneath the one we live in, and pulling back the sometimes quite literal curtain to reveal what's lurking behind it. Take Blue Velvet, for instance. On the most basic level, it's a pretty standard noir following an everyman becoming something of an amateur detective to follow clues and put away the bad guy. The setting is a Norman Rockwell painting full of white picket fences and girls next door, but Kyle MacLachlan's Jeffrey descends past that facade into the world of gas-huffing drug dealers and loungy lip-syncers that is anything but standard. Rooted in the veneer of a mid-century Americana that's plainly depicted as being not the whole truth at minimum, all of Lynch's work was tinged with a healthy dose of surrealism and wholly unconcerned with being grounded. There's a great documentary digging into Lynch's relationship with the Wizard of Oz, which follows that particular yellow brick road even further. But the point is, the influences at work in his films, Blue Velvet included, are a set that simply doesn't exist anymore, and we're not likely to see it again. At this point in movie history, we're effectively on our third or fourth generation of filmmakers inspired by the previous generations. In the beginning of cinema as an art form, there were artists from other disciplines using film as their newly chosen medium. As more of the road stretched out behind us, so to speak, filmmakers wanted to make movies like the ones they grew up watching. Lynch, of course, was among those. But for as unique an artist as he was, at some point he stopped being a distinct collection of influences and became the influence himself. And that is where I come back to the term Lynchian, and why we're likely to just never see the like of him again. There's a moment in the middle of one of 2024's more unexpected hits, I Saw the TV Glow, where the protagonists find themselves at a bar listening to live music. The way the camera floats, the theatrical wardrobe of the singer, the red strobing lights out of time with the cadence of the song, it's there to create an atmosphere, and it's as Lynchian a scene as we've gotten in some time. Jane Schoenbrun's film trades in the type of surrealism familiar to Lynch fans, and was in fact inspired by Twin Peaks. One of the great things about a rangy term like Lynchian is that you can see his influence across a wide array of films and filmmakers. Yorgos Lanthimos has a darkly comedic sensibility that peels back layers of polite society. Think about The Lobster and how it pulls people out of the real world, sequestering them in a hotel where they have to find love or risk being turned into an animal. It's the absurd scrutiny of the everyday things we take for granted that reveals that Lynchian thing lurking under the surface. Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse is an avant-garde bit of nightmare, ditto Ari Aster's Midsommar. We've gotten David Robert Mitchell's It Follows and Under the Silver Lake, Emerald Fennell's Saltburn, there's Richard Kelly's Donnie Darko, and another standout 2024 hit, Love Lies Bleeding from Rose Glass. Lynch is clearly on Tarantino's list of filmmakers to homage, and there's even fellow Dune director Denis Villeneuve's pre-blockbuster stuff like Enemy or Maelstrom. They each have an otherworldly quality to them that owes a debt to David Lynch. And David Lynch might not be your favorite filmmaker, and maybe you haven't seen all of his films or they're just not your thing, but it's important to recognize him as something of an end of an era. Like his films that invoke a bygone time only to explore the world just beyond our usual frame of view, his influence on today's and tomorrow's filmmakers is what he leaves behind. And I, for one, will always be looking just under the surface, hoping to find those Lynchian things lurking.